Mark, great to see you here.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me, Joe.
Yeah. And first of all, it wasn't too long ago. Congratulations on JC.
Really excited, and really excited for the technology to be in a great company like Edwards. And we're already working toward next generation technologies, which obviously they're much harder to resource in a smaller company. So it's really great for patients because I'm very passionate about the field of aortic regurgitation and the need for a dedicated stent. So this was a great win for patients and for the technology.
And it's great to see wins in that structural space because that's threading a needle these days in the environment. And it was interesting to watch both you and Yenivalve. Could have been the same hour on that deal going down, but that's a whole nother discussion. Yeah. What I wanted to dig in was you've got a really interesting and I think admirable path and device to date. And I say to date because I think you've got a lot more yardage on you and runway on you. So, practicing clinician, then went over and built a substantial program at Medtronic, then went out into the entrepreneurial world and got into the startup world and now exited JC. And now I'm going to be curious what's next, but tell me about that journey because there's not many that do it successfully as you have.
I appreciate the question, and I feel very privileged that I had the opportunity to kind of have, and I'm not done yet, as you said, to have the career opportunities that I've had, because each of those career moves and pivots basically has allowed me to strengthen my leadership skills, my knowledge base. One of my mentors, Dr. Valentin Fuster, who's at Mount Sinai, he sits down and says to me, we should all challenge ourselves at least every 10 years with a new opportunity. Otherwise you get stale. And I truly believe that. In practice, I practiced for a number of years as a very high volume interventionalist. And during that time period, it is a true privilege to take care of patients and do what we do. I didn't leave the cath lab because I didn't like practicing or taking care of patients. There's nothing like taking a patient with an acute myocardial infarction, discharging them, a couple days later after, they almost die. That transition occurred because it happened to be the right time. I was asked to come out of practice by somebody who I absolutely admire, an individual named Stacy Enzenseng, who's a great leader in this field, was the president of EV3 at that time. EV3 was being acquired by Covidien. And Stacy said, hey, we need another chief medical officer on the vascular side. Will you make the transition? And I made the transition. It took a lot of discernment and a lot of time to make that decision. And you also have to change your behavior. I think, we've spoken about this in the past. When you're in the cardiac catheterization lab or as a physician in the hospital, you're a lot of times leading by authority. When you move to the industry side, it's all by influence, leadership by influence. And that's a tough lesson to learn. I'll be very vulnerable here. I had to go through a lot of shrinking, and coaching to ultimately learn the skills to become successful. But then those pivots from there to what I did at the University of Pennsylvania, what I did in big companies like a Medtronic and a smaller companies in operating roles, and then bringing it home, here and with JC Medical, those transitions are critically important, to what I've become and have allowed, I think, me to grow and learn a tremendous amount over the time period.
And thanks for sharing that because you remind me about UPenn as well. I totally forgot about that one. What's interesting right now is I've seen this on the surgical robotic side, and I might have seen it sort of manifesting itself now in interventional cardiology. What do I see? I see the strategics who have their KOL favorites and even their CMOs who might be in their roles for too long come in here, and there becomes an ossification of perspective around technologies, acquisition integrations, or even potentially targets, because you've got this thinking that's ossified the organization. And there's not always the best guidance advice on where things should go and how you move all these parts, because innovation's happening outside the strategics now. It's happening on the fringes. So from your perspective, do we allow the clinicians to sit at the table long enough in this decision-making process? And if you could build a guidance team for a big strategic, what things would you look for?
Yeah, I think first, physician leadership inside big strategics is critically important. And I think we do need to have physician leaders sitting at the table. We're making medical devices and technologies, medical technologies that go into patients. And what we did, I remember at Covidian and even Medtronic, we took patients and brought them to our manufacturing facilities so that the people on the lines can understand that they're making a product that's going to go into their mother or father, grandmother, grandfather. So you need to have that physician input. Inside of industry, though, it's important that that physician input balance the medical input versus the business input. You have to think differently. As a physician, I remember I used to sit on all of these steering committees as a consultant for different industries. And I would say, why don't you just acquire this, or why can't you acquire that? When you go in to an industry in a leadership position from a physician standpoint, you need to look at it with that physician lens, but also the business lens. And that's tough sometimes for people. Your question about building out, a team at a leadership level within a strategic company, I think you need to have, as I mentioned, that physician leadership. There needs to be that diversity of thought. That physician leader needs to be willing to challenge the other functional leaders. He or she needs to challenge marketing, needs to challenge clinical, needs to challenge regulatory in timelines, in direction, in strategy, and really feel comfortable in challenging. And again, that's another attribute that's important when a physician makes that transition, to a business role.
And to your point, you got your coaching on the job. And I've said this to the venture people and the private equity people, one of the best investments you could make is getting a coach for your CEO, new or experienced, because every scenario is different. And I would love to see some sort of function within these large strategics, with market caps of 100 billion plus, of having a coaching component at that executive level, because too many times people are defending a career and not necessarily making a decision that's broadly appropriate. What are your thoughts on clinical trials? I had Juan sitting here, Granada sitting here, and we've been talking a lot about the focus on technology and the focus on a device, an episodic device. But as we start to step back and start to look at it at large, clinical trials and how they're run, digital twins, real world evidence, right? Do you see a transition happening, or should there one be happening in the marketplace around FDA and digital and the empowerment of that new statistical capability on the AI side?
Absolutely, and I think the FDA is moving in that direction, and they realize that, the time that it takes to run these long clinical trials with all the patients that are involved, we need the real world evidence to be a part of this. And I think it's just a matter of time and an understanding of how we implement that real world evidence into our clinical trials. But we also need to have the patient a voice in our clinical trials as well. I think we sometimes forget that the patients are the ones that are going to be receiving the therapies. They need to be involved in the setup and the design and how we look at our clinical trials. The FDA is very much looking now at things like quality of life endpoints, as you've seen. Some of the endpoints are going to be very different as we move forward. You mentioned digital. Digital is going to be a key component to basically really be much more precise about who we're going to enroll and the treatment effect, how the treatment effect is going to impact a particular patient population, so that we're not picking a population that is not going to give the FDA what they need from a safety and efficacy standpoint, but also not a signal to the scientific community and the clinical community about what they need to know about a particular technology.
So as you wrap up JC, and again, I don't know your promise to Edwards, but let's just imagine, you're in that prime right now. You're an interventionalist, you practiced, you've been at the big strategic, the smaller ones, you've transacted, you have a real sense for the marketplace. So what are you thinking about on that next step in your career in 2024?
First, one thing, and just being at a meeting like the TCT meeting here, you realize what a great field we have, because there's such amazing talent within this field, and it just keeps you on your feet. And we know that we're going to be setting patients up for amazing technologies and hopefully more optimal treatment moving forward. For me personally, I think it's important to look at transformational technologies, not just iterative types of things. How can we truly move the field forward? How can we develop prevention at an earlier stage to basically get at some of the disease processes that we need to get at before we get into where it's going to cost the healthcare system tremendous dollars. So it's not just designing iterative or being involved in iterative technologies. It's where is that transformational field? There's so many exciting things out there. You speak about robotics. We talk about the brain interface. We talk about what's being done with neurostimulation and other really exciting areas. It's just the panacea of great innovation and technology, and I look forward to hopefully participating once we're done with what we need to do to get JC Medical on its ground at Edwards.
Mark, I always appreciate our conversations we've had over the years and your insights into things, and I know the industry does as well.
Well, thank you for having me, Joe. It's great to see you, and appreciate the time.
Got it. I'm Joe Mullings from the floor at TCT 2024. Be well.